All right, how do I make this so you don't hear all of my out breath? How's that? I do listen to Vinny breathe a lot when I'm in this room too. So you might have to do the same with me. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Big Heart City Meditation SF. I'm Matt Hahn. And I'm only following that particular opening because that's what Vinny does. So maybe that's what he wants. I'm wondering if we could just settle in for a couple of minutes. Just arrived tonight. No need to take a particular posture. And maybe breathing in together, we might breathe out together. Let's do it again. And one more time. Bring attention to the ways that the body touches the earth. Maybe pressure beneath the feet, beneath the legs, or the back. Maybe bring attention to the way that objects touch the body. This could be clothing on the skin. It could be jewelry or hair, other parts of the body. And I invite you to turn attention inward towards any sensations that might be within the body, beneath the skin. This could be hardness or softness, movement or stillness. It could be digestion. It could be discomfort or pain. All of these sensations together, beneath the body, atop the body, within the body, might give a sense of the whole body. Right here, right now. Welcome home. I'm noting craving for the nice bell. So welcome, of course, to everybody in person, and welcome to the folks online. I don't know how YouTube Live works, but hello. I don't know how many of you there are, but hello. 70, there we go. Renee asked me to mention that, and I still can't see you anywhere. I'm so used to Zoom, where I can see faces. And this is an interesting spot to be in, because usually I'm sitting right there, behind you. That's usually where I'm sitting. So this is a unique perspective to have. And when I come here the first Friday of the month, it's usually kind of like a date night. My wife, Noelle, and I come up here. I work at the airport. So she meets me, we go out to dinner, we come here, and it's kind of like the Sangha that's a little bit further away from home, because I live in South San Jose. And sure, we come here for some awakening, but I also just kind of come here for vibes. You know, good people, good hearts, good music. And, I kind of feel like I can just melt in this room sometimes. Maybe just exhale with all of you, whether you know you're breathing out with me or not. It kind of feels like a sanctuary, like a home of sorts. And I thought I was going to be a lot more terrified than I am right now. That's interesting how the build-up to things is always much worse than the thing itself. So per usual, I'm going to start with a story. It's kind of what I do. And we're going to go back to a prior lifetime of mine. Back to when I was 18 years old and then 25 years old. But I was arrested when I was 18. And I faced a number of years in prison, and I had this attorney. And his name was Steve Cowgill. And when you're fighting a court case like I was, you can't talk to people openly and honestly. And the only person I could talk to was this man, Steve. And so I was an 18-year-old young man, if we even want to call me a young man. And he was an older man, and I grew to be a little bit of a father figure for me. He was just really kind and really compassionate and very advice-giving. He was the type of lawyer that would visit you in jail, not because there was anything you needed to talk about for court, but just to see how you were doing. And so I had him during my first arrest, and I trusted him. And a number of years later, when I was 25, I was arrested again. And he was my attorney again. This time, things were a little bit different. I had gone to prison the first time I was arrested, but this time I was facing 3 strikes, so it was I was facing life in prison. I was in a bad place, Other than that, my closest childhood friend had died, which was part of the conditions for my relapse into drugs and alcohol. My then wife was leaving me. I was in a rough patch. And about 6 months into my time in the county jail, Steve came to visit me. And this guy was, if you didn't know him and you looked at him, you'd think he was a little bit angry, maybe. He had that kind of face. He had a serious vibe to him. He also had a larger than life kind of vibe, kind of like whooshed hair and a big mustache, and he smoked Marlboros. He's a really cool dude, good cat. And but he seemed a little bit more serious or pensive on this particular visit. And that's when he told me that a couple weeks earlier he'd had a heart attack, a really terrible, devastating heart attack, and that he wasn't really sure why he was alive, because according to his doctors, he shouldn't have survived. And so he suggested something to me, or maybe he was asking himself, maybe it was a question to whatever his version of the universe is, but he said, maybe I'm here to save you. Maybe I'm here to keep you from doing life in prison. I don't know. And then he said, but that's not actually why I came here tonight. He said, I've been going through your case file and looking at the evidence against you, and I want to be clear that you understand that you are not going home soon. I'm going to do the best I can to keep you from spending the rest of your life here. But if I were to hazard a guess, that will not be within the next 10 years. Maybe it's 15. Maybe it's 20 or more. I don't know. But you're going to be here. And then he kind of held his arms out like this to kind of like indicate the space we were in. And he said, this is your home now. This is where you have to make a life for yourself. And however many years in the future it is that you come out on the back end of this, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is, it's like who you are and how you are depends upon the choices you make right now. This is your home now. I can hear my heartbeat. See, during my first prison term, I wasn't gone very long. I know this probably sounds funny to folks who've never been to prison, but it was only a couple of years. And it was short enough that I could spend the first half of it reminiscing about past freedom. And I could spend the second half of it fantasizing about future freedom. And I never had to be somewhere in the middle, in the present, thinking about making a life for myself where I was. I didn't have to do what so many people do when they have to spend long periods of time in prison, which is to make a home there somehow, to make a life there. You know how sometimes when someone we love passes away, or there's a rupture with someone we care about, we think about the last words they shared with us in a particular way. They have a little bit of weight, more gravity. Maybe we look at the words like as if there were some type of like prophecy nestled in there somewhere. This is your home now were the last words that Steve Cowgill spoke to me, because he died 2 weeks later surfing at Steamer's Lane in Santa Cruz of a second heart attack. And so this is your home now is something that echoed for me very strongly shortly after he died, but continued to echo throughout the years past. And so as I've been thinking about this talk, thinking about what it means to make wherever you are a home. And, kind of the beginning of that sort of process is like, what is the definition of a home? What do we mean when we say home? And I've thought about words that are related to home, like refuge, like sanctuary, words like that. And what I landed on is that home, in some sense, usually carries something like a relative physical safety. There's no such thing as absolute physical safety, but relatives, right? And there's some comfort there. Maybe a sense of familiarity, some emotional warmth. Maybe the beings we love live there, whether they're human or furry. Maybe people are happy there when we arrive there, and maybe a little bit sad when you're not. And then this word refuge has kind of similar connotations to home. It tends to have like the sense of safety, but it has this kind of extra connotation of something that we might go to temporarily, something we might retreat to, a refuge. But I feel like homes are like that too. I mean, one could argue that every single night when I get home, I'm retreating from the world. And then there's the word sanctuary, which I like because it typically kind of means, this is officially a sanctuary, I suppose, this room we're in, like this space that is set aside from prosecution, right? A space that is protected in some capacity intentionally. But I like the word because it also has this implication of holy or blessedness, sacredness, consecration, something like that. And so when I think of the Dharma of Steve Cowgill, attorney at law, when he suggested that this is my home now, I like to think that he was talking about all of these, that he was pointing towards all of these. And so I started to consider the fact that no matter how long I was going to be in prison, whether it was 10 years or longer, I still have this limited number of years on this planet. And that no matter how terrible or awful or depressing or painful the environment I currently live in, it is still my life. It's still a significant chunk of this limited number of years that I get to spend here. And so I started to touch into this idea that my life might be precious. And I'd never lived previously with that consideration. I didn't think about other people's lives being precious. And that's probably why I was headed to prison. And I certainly didn't think about my own life being precious, because I probably wouldn't have been heading to prison. There's this sutta called a yoke with a hole. And in it, the Buddha is talking to a bunch of folks in the Sangha, and he says, mendicants, suppose the earth was entirely covered with water, and a person threw a yoke with a single hole into it. And if you're not familiar with what we're talking about here, just think about a piece of wood, a wooden, something like a lifesaver, a piece of wood with a hole in it. A person threw a yoke with a single hole into it, into this vast water. The east wind wafts it west, the west wind wafts it east, the north wind wafts it south, and the south wind wafts it north. And then there was a one-eyed turtle who popped up once every 100 years. What do you think, mendicants? Would that one-eyed turtle popping up once a century still poke its neck through the hole in that yoke? And of course, the monks and nuns around him said, it would be an anomaly, sir. And the Buddha replied, that's how anomalous it is to be born into human life. So perhaps this notion of making home runs parallel with this notion of a precious human life. We've all heard of people doing time, right? When people get sentenced to prison, they're doing time. But there's actually this huge culture around doing time, and that when folks are incarcerated, they engage with any and all activities with the express purpose of making time pass as fast as humanly possible. We celebrate the passage of time. We take great joy in ripping up calendars on New Year's Eve every year, because another year down is another year closer for those of us who are going home to home. So there's this culture around doing time, and some people do it in unhealthy ways, right? Like they get high, maybe they try to sleep as much as humanly possible. I had cellies like that. Like, bro, get up. It's time to wake up. And some folks might just play a lot of cards, watch a lot of TV. Some people spend their time getting involved in the racist and violent prison politics. It's a way to occupy time, certainly. And then some of us would do it in a healthy way, perhaps. Something like what might be termed just an enormous practical self-improvement project. Go to every group available, learn every trade available, read every book you ever wanted to read, study every subject you wanted to study. Recovery groups, Buddhist groups, meditation groups, Catholic meditation groups, Four Agreements groups, like the whole thing. We did it all, Do. And so I did lots of wholesome things, but I could have been more present. And what I had started to do was confuse not wasting time with productivity. That somehow I had to be productive if I wanted to make the best use of my time. And so how we spend our time becomes really important when we invite this notion of this precious human life. I had this cellie, his name was Paul, one of the best cellies I ever had. And he was a lifer. And so if there was anybody who had no choice but to make prison his home, it would have been someone like him. Because there was no future home for him. There was only where he was. And I had this schedule in there. I'd wake up in the morning, go to breakfast at like 5 a.m. I'd go to work. I'd come back at 3 p.m. They'd count me. I'd leave my cell. I'd go to dinner. I'd go to a group. I'd meditate. I'd work out. I'd come back 8:30 at night, put on my sweatpants, crack open a book, turn on my reading light, sleep till 10 and do it again tomorrow. And I invited him to be my cellie because I had met him in one of my meditation groups, so I figured we'd get along, right? But he popped up one day after we'd been living with each other a few months, just as it was time for me to read my book. And he said, Matt, you've got this schedule, right? And kind of like recapitulated what I just told you. And he said, please talk to me. That cell was his home, and he wanted it to be like a home was whenever anybody would come home to it. How was your day? What you doing? What's going on? Some degree of intimacy. And so I started to become sensitive to this notion of killing time, and the notion that killing time is no different than killing oneself. But then I also had to get in touch with the intentionality behind killing time or doing time. And that even if I'm doing something wholesome, I might still just be killing time. And so I started to seek connection a little bit more. He and I had a practice of talking more. We cooked like little spreads together at night. Sometimes I'd come home to my cell and he'd be at the hot pot with tortillas on the hot pot, and he's got some chicken on the bone he got from the chow hall, and he's stirring it up with mayonnaise and squeezed cheese. And I'm like, what's for dinner? I'm standing at the bars waiting for the cop to open it. I'm like, what's for dinner? He's like, burritos. And it's like coming home. We took our shoes off at the door. And so there's how we spend our time when life is precious, when we make home here, and then there's who we spend our time with. Because who we spend our time with, to a certain extent, determines who we become. And those sorts of personalities are relatively easy to discern on the prison yard. Maybe a little bit harder out here, but inside you can kind of find the people. You can kind of find your people inside. Paul was one of them. The folks that went to those groups that I met him at were others. I know everybody's heard the sutta before, so I won't read the entire thing, but I'm sure we all know about the Buddha's attendant, Ananda, saying, "This is half of the holy life. Admirable friends, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie." And the Buddha says, no, it's the whole of the holy life. Who we associate with, who we spend our time with, that's what draws us onward. That's the whole of the holy life. And so with this notion that life is precious, and this notion of kind of making a painful, difficult environment my home, it forced me, and I think it forces us, to look for meaning or beauty in places where we might not otherwise see it. And there came a point in my practice, I'd say a couple of years after Steve had said what he said to me, when I finally started to see some, I suppose, cracks in the dukkha, some cracks in the suffering. And one of the earliest memories of this happening for me, I was working as a landscaper. I'm not a landscaper. I was a weed whacker. And in Folsom, this place called China Hill. And I had to weed whack all day. And we had these gardens that were actually illegal. We weren't supposed to have gardens, but the guards pretended like they didn't see them so long as we weed whacked well for like 5 or 6 hours a day. So we had this garden, and I would go down and I would run water into the troughs that we dug like around the vegetables. And I'd sit on this granite rock and just watch the water kind of fill the trough. It was a nice view. I could see Folsom Dam and over the walls. And out of the stump next to me, there was a sprig, and one day this little carpenter bee perched itself on this sprig, and it was just looking at me. I'm like, well, that's kind of cute. And then he came the next day. And then for a couple of weeks, like this carpenter bee, I'd run the water, and the carpenter bee would just be like, right here. And I felt like we were having this unspoken conversation, like there was some sort of community being built with the natural world through this bee, and it was beautiful. And then I got brave, and I stuck my finger out. And he crawled on my finger, and I looked at him like this. I swear we were having a moment. And it was beautiful. This is kind of where my love of insects started to grow. I'm starting to realize, because another moment that showed up for me in that same spot, sitting on that same piece of granite, was that when the water would start to absorb into the earth, we'd get this slick mud along the edge of the trough. And it's almost like clockwork. These insects, I don't know if they were wasps or hornets or something like that. It's like they knew when the mud was getting ready to show. And from over the hill, over the prison wall, these hornets would come, and they'd crawl down to the edge of that mud and make little balls, and then fly back to build their homes. And I started to expect them, and they would show up. It's like they knew when they'd get some good mud. It was beautiful. And sometimes this beauty shows up because of its contrast with the pain. the contrast with the suffering. What comes to mind is I'm thinking of November of 2020, election morning in 2020. I was walking in the harbor in Foster City during sunrise, and the sky was just this brilliant color. And I remember kind of juxtaposing the brilliance and the beauty of the sky with the way that the world felt so unbalanced, if it was balanced at all, and the way that fears were arising that day. And a thought arose that yet this remains. I'll take that as an amen. And then I think of the standing next to my grandmother when she took her last breath. Someone who came to visit me the whole time I was in prison and got to see me free. And it was beautiful. And so what happens is we don't always get to choose how we spend our time, despite the fact that we'd like to. We would like our time to be spent doing things that are always wholesome or onward leaning, but we don't always get to pick what we're doing, and we certainly don't always get to pick who we're with. And sometimes the pain in the world is so great that it is just so very, very hard to see where the beauty in it is. It's really hard to discern those cracks where things might shine through. And this is where some of the preliminary practices we see within Tibetan Buddhist traditions might come into play, where they suggest we make difficulty the path because we don't always get to choose. Around the time, it might have been even before, but around the time of my stay in the county jail, around the time when Steve was still alive, as I mentioned, I was in a rough patch. It's one of the most painful periods of my life. I did not want to go on living, but I would fluctuate between this not wanting to go on living and then having these chinks of hope that maybe I could. It's not like that type of ideation I had was persistent around the clock. But I felt so much shame because I should have known better. I'd been here once already, and here I was again. I'd shamed myself. I'd shamed my family. There's so much self-loathing, and it hurts so bad. And I said this prayer to myself, and it went something like, please just make this hurt enough that I never have to hurt this way again. Please make it hurt. I don't know what I was praying to, but it was some sort of expression of like, just a willingness to let the suffering in, which is not what I'd been doing previously, a willingness to feel it. I was on a training retreat in the Garrison in June, and Los Sarmiento, who some of you may know, was there to offer music and to talk. And in it, they shared this Tibetan prayer that was so reminiscent of this prayer that I'd said to myself that it just kind of brought me to tears. And it's much more formal than my prayer, but I'm going to read it to you. And it goes, grant that I may be given the appropriate difficulties and sufferings on this journey, so that my heart may be truly awakened, and that my practice of liberation and universal compassion may be truly fulfilled. And the Dharma teacher, Kaira Jewel Lingo, also uses this prayer and calls it the bring it prayer. And what might it be to meet this world on fire, this world in continuous, perpetual collapse, and say, bring it, because I can make a home here. And so in time, it seems so counterintuitive to welcome in this sort of dukkha. It seems so counterintuitive, but I guess I just gave it a shot enough times that in time and as years passed, I started to have the capacity to reflect on my time, both with practice and in recovery, because they coincide, they're coterminal. And I started to consider all the myriad pains I had gone through. I had thought of what it was like to face life in prison. I thought of what it was like to be subjected to the violence that's in prison. I thought of what it was like to be in a cage and to miss my family and to watch some of my family die while I was away. And it hurt. And I had no regret. No regret for having experienced it. Because there's something that happens when we view this pain through the lens of it being precious. There's something that happens when we view loss in this way as precious. And the fear and pain of experiencing them, just like the fear, I suppose, of coming in and sitting in front of you all tonight, like it never matches the freedom on the other side. It never matches them with the freedom that comes through walking with them with the intention of making them a home. And so in time, we see that home is not someplace in the world. It's not like a specific geographic location. It's a quality of the heart, and that the home eventually can be found anywhere in the world. We've all heard the saying, right? Home is where the heart is. And we used to have arguments about that phrase in prison, about whether we should even call a cell a home. He's like, is your heart there, homie? And that's the type of stuff they would say. This notion of like, the home is where only the things you love are, like it's just some different place than where you might be. But this is what they meant. This is where the home is. It's like a portable refuge. And so each moment might become an offering. Each moment might become a teaching. And I began, and I think if we're here, we have begun to develop some degree of faith. Maybe even an unshakable faith. Faith in not just the capacity to weather storms, right? We can adapt and we can weather storms, but more like faith in the capacity to transmute them into awakening. To transmute them into a place where one can find refuge and sanctuary. It reminds me of, I'll quote him, but I don't know if I'm actually quoting him. I'm probably saying it wrong, but Matthew Brent Silver often likes to say, don't let any suffering go wasted. I think I got it right, but he may have said it with different variations. And so with this view of making this our home and with this view of preciousness of life, we might become the home. And this, of course, is one of the last official teachings of the Buddha. And this comes from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which is the sutta about the final days of the Buddha's life. In it, the Buddha had laid down between two sala trees. He was getting close. And he offered this teaching. Mendicants, Be your own island, your own refuge, with no other refuge. Let the teaching be your island and your refuge, with no other refuge. And so we have the traditional three refuges, in a way, as the path towards becoming our own refuge and our own home. And I want to close with a poem. But first I want to circle back to that teaching and talk a little bit about the word island. Because an island sounds kind of lonely. The word itself that's being translated from the Pali is Dipa, which is D-I-P-A. And there is some argument, on the internet at least, about how to translate this word. Because in earlier translations of this word, it was translated as lamp or light. And so you may have encountered this teaching before, and you may have heard it as mendicants, be your own light, or mendicants, be your own lamp. And I do like that way of translating it. It has this like shining the way forward kind of vibe to it. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because the poem I want to end with is by Mary Oliver, and it was written clearly with her having read that version of the sutta. And the invitation is, while I read this, to perhaps hold a couple of things in your mind's eye. On one hand, maybe hold perhaps the image of like just a beautiful sunrise, whatever that means for you. And then on the other hand, the image of an old man lying down between two sala trees, the Buddha preparing to take his last breath. The Buddha's last teaching. Make of yourself a light, said the Buddha before he died. I think of this every morning as the east begins to tear off its many clouds of darkness, to send up the first signal, a white fan streaked with pink and violet, even green. An old man, he lay down between two sala trees, and he might have said anything, knowing it was his final hour. The light burns upward. It thickens and settles over the fields. Around him, the villagers gathered and stretched forward to listen. Even before the sun itself hangs, disattached in the blue air, I am touched everywhere by its ocean of yellow waves. No doubt, he thought of everything that had ever happened in his difficult life. And then I feel the sun itself as it blazes over the hills. Like a million flowers on fire, clearly, I'm not needed. Yet I feel myself turning into something of inexplicable value. And slowly, beneath the branches, he raised his head. And he looked into the faces of the frightened crowd. I offer that for your consideration.